All righty. Good morning, guys. I hope everyone's having a good morning. We have a guest that everyone enjoys, including myself, and it's been a long time since we've actually had him on. So we've been collecting questions on Twitter with Jason Holmes. Thanks to Jason. And the Colonel has decided that he's picked out quite a few good ones, and he's going to go through each one and answer them for us. And we've got some pictures to go through as well. But I'm going to let Mr. Ed kind of talk about what he's been up to since he's last been on, and then we'll just seamlessly slide into him going over some of these questions. So, Mr. Ed, how goes it?
Good, thank you. Just to give you an update of what I've been doing, I have a paperback version of my book coming out fairly soon. You should be able to get it by Amazon. It's cheaper than the hardback, but not as cheap as the digital version. And then, unbelievably, my book is being rendered into an audio book, which is a shocker because the book is some 400 pages. They have a professional actor who's narrating the book, and I don't know exactly when to expect that. It's going to be tough on him. I had to instruct him on acronyms, military acronyms and abbreviations. My book is full of those, and he's never been in the military, so he had no idea what they were. Beyond that, I've been giving briefings and interviews in other venues, and I don't know exactly when those will be posted. They will be sent to discrete organizations. They're intended to inspire the youth of the United States to valor, acts of valor, whether it's in their civilian life or if they happen to join the military. That'll be interesting. I and about 5 others were interviewed, to include John Plaster, who has some very good comments to offer, and Major General Bo Ray also has interesting. And there's another 1-0 from CCC or FOB2 by the name of Spurgeon. And I think he was with RT Vermont. So I haven't listened to his interview yet, but I'm sure he has something pithy and interesting to say.
That's Bill Spurgeon with RT Texas.
It was RT Texas. You're right.
Yes.
Correct. And what else have you? I've submitted an article through Marine Corps Special Operations Command. They will submit it to the Marine Corps Gazette on my behalf, hopefully to make this next issue coming up. That issue will be focused on special operations. So that should be interesting as well. Other than that, I'm working on my second book, which is focused on unconventional warfare. It's the companion book to the one on special reconnaissance. And I am working on the manuscript. I haven't submitted it yet. I hope to submit it within a month or maybe 2. And then I have to go through an editing process with the publisher. And then it'll take some more months in order to publish it. I have no idea how long that will take. Okay, so that's what I have to offer as an intro. And if you're aware of my background, I was 1-0 of RT New York when I was enlisted. And I was in RT New York running recon for 25 months and had roughly 25 missions, almost all of them cross-border into Laos. So with that, I think we can move on to these queries from the audience that have previously been submitted that Bud has indicated to you already. So there's the first one here. Some of these I'm going to go through very quickly, and others I'll spend more time on. So there's one here from Shark 4, and his question is, how great were the Huey pilots? And I have nothing but praise for the Huey pilots. The pilots that supported us were all volunteer. It was a kind of an interesting recruitment process that they had. When they solicited volunteers, they told them, we can't tell you what the mission is, but it's classified and it's highly dangerous. And a lot of these guys didn't hesitate to include their, officers, warrant officers, and enlisted. It was a point of honor for them to support us. Give you a quick little story. I think it was the 57th Aviation Company was visited by a 3-star who was the first field force commander, under which that aviation battalion and company were commanded by this commander, 3-star general. And he's with his sergeant major, and they visit the 57th at the Dak To airfield. And the soldiers, the enlisted soldiers, are wearing black fatigues and earrings, and they weren't striking a particular military pose that the general did not appreciate. So he commented to his sergeant major and said, these guys have been supporting Special Forces too long. We're going to swap them out. They proceeded to do that. And how they managed this was man for man, they switched out personnel from one helicopter company to the successive helicopter company. All the same guys we've been operating with all along. So they actually deceived their first field force commander just to continue their operations for us. I want to say also, you have to think about how nervy these guys were when they were coming into an LZ, a hot LZ, with both their hands occupied in managing the aircraft. And despite taking fire and occasionally some casualties, they came down and supported us and picked us up when we were in dire circumstances. And they never asked for praise. They just took pride in how they were supporting this operation. So Having said that, I'll move on to the next question here, which is a question from 7-6, and his question is, what was the scariest part of the jungle? And it was probably when we entered onto an LZ, being dropped off from a helicopter, because you didn't know on the verge of the LZ whether there was an enemy unit occupying that real estate. And some teams actually landed on LZs that were where major units were sitting in the wood line. The photo that you see here is rainforest with broken canopy. And right in the center there, you see that dot there, that is a helicopter. And that helicopter is about to do a ladder extraction from a LZ on the side of a ridge. You get to see the size of those trees corresponding to the size of the helicopter, and you get some kind of relationship there. And then next would be crossing streams, trails, and roads. We call those danger areas. And whenever we did that, and I did it frequently, more frequently than most team leaders, I even walked along trails and roads, which was discouraged by SOP. My mountain yards became very concerned. So those were the scariest parts of the jungle where we operated. So I have another question here. Let's see. So was there conclusive evidence of Russians or Chinese leading NVA patrols? And that actually was asked twice. And my answer to that is we saw no Russians, but RT Maine killed a Chinese advisor while they were being pursued. And that was the team leader was Dave Baker from RT Maine. Next question here is by Bill Snap 4, and it says, did you feel like Mac SOG's purpose in hindsight was too much being bait strategically when the majority of your mission is finding numerically superior enemy and having them chase and hunt you? How do you feel like MACV SOG's core strategy exposed you guys to too much danger versus regular Special Forces ops? And that's an excellent question. So SOG never told us that we were being used as bait. This would have had a negative effect on morale for at least from their perspective. They thought that it might. And I have no actual evidence that this is a conceived strategy by Chief SOG, but I can tell you a story related to this. So after I came back from Vietnam, I was assigned to the 7th Special Forces Group, and General Mike Healy had just taken command of the 1st Special Forces at Fort Bragg, then known as Fort Bragg. And he had been the former commander of the 5th Special Forces Group while I was there. And he spoke to the assembled NCOs, and I think officers might have been in the mix. And he explained that the biggest problem that we had in Vietnam, not just Special Forces, but everywhere, is to get the enemy to mass so that we could blow them away with strategic and tactical air and artillery. They would operate in a decentralized fashion to avoid attack by close air support or tactical air support, and only mass when they were going to attack an A camp or some other area, a build-up area within South Vietnam. So his strategy was to throw bait out there or induce the enemy to mass so that they could destroy them. We could destroy them. An example of this was an A camp called Ben Het, which was located just down the road from our launch site at Dak To. And every Tet, while I was there, the enemy would mount a major attack against the A camp because that would be a great propaganda item. And inevitably, they picked Ben Het, but they also picked some other areas in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. Ben Het was well armed, well equipped. They had artillery stationed on the A camp to include 105 millimeter howitzers, 155 millimeter howitzers, 8-inch howitzers, 175 millimeter guns. They had mortars of 4 deuce mortars and 81 millimeter mortars and 60 millimeter mortars. They had recoilless rifles, 106 and 90 millimeter. They had 4 tanks located, and they had 2 dusters, which were armored vehicles with Bofors anti-aircraft guns mounted on them. On mountaintops or ridge tops that were nearby, they also had 155 millimeter artillery batteries. So when the North Vietnamese attacked, at a minimum, they attacked in regimental size. But while I was there, they attacked in divisional size with an artillery brigade involved. And they actually got severe casualties in their attempts to overrun the camp. And then once the enemy had committed to the fight, then 5th Special Forces Group would insert the Mike Force on LZs near them to fight them from their rear. So I saw this same thing being played out. I noticed it. Other 1-0s didn't notice it. That because the enemy was so heavily present in our area of operations, particularly near the base areas, that we were being run out or chased out on our missions, and fewer recon teams were being able to accomplish their mission because of that. All the LZs that we had, the enemy were fully aware of, and they had LZ watchers and units stationed around there to include pursuit and tracker teams, some of them special their own special operations. So in order to stop the NVA flow of men and equipment down their main supply routes, we would occasionally establish roadblocks along the MSR, and that was something that the NVA could not tolerate. So they would mass to attack the roadblock, which was exploitation companies sized or even platoon size, and we would plaster them with TAC air and organic fires. We didn't have any artillery systems to support us in Laos. And that worked like a charm. We didn't do much to halt their resupply of their units that were forward inside South Vietnam, or who were arrayed along the border in Cambodia. But those units that were moving down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and in the sanctuary of Laos, they would come out from their bivouac areas and their field fortifications to attack the exploitation forces. Well, the same thing basically happened with recon teams. The recon teams would, within half an hour, be pursued by an enemy tracker team, and the enemy would attempt to force the team into a hammer and anvil situation where the pursuing force would be the hammer and the anvil would be an ambush up to platoon size in front of the team as the team was moving away from the pursuers. And this provided us another opportunity. We would engage the pursuers and the tracker teams and kill them if we could. If we couldn't, then we did evasive movements until we got up to our area of interest, and then use TAC air on whatever we happened to pick up. And sometimes the enemy pursuers would close in on us, and then again we would use TAC air and organic weapons to kill them. So for me, that meant that this was effectively an economy of force operation, where we got the enemy to mass and to kill them. And I didn't particularly, I wasn't particularly keen on the reconnaissance end of things because we were getting less and less intelligence because of the density of the enemy. So I thought that our operations were necessarily hunter-killer operations, and that's the way I operated my team. I expanded my team from a typical 8-man team to a 12-man team, and they were heavily armed, and in order to fight it out with the enemy. And if we happened to kill an enemy unit or ambush an enemy unit, then we would police up any intelligence we found after we engaged in direct action. So that's the answer to that question. So another question is asking, what skills might I have improved on? I can say that I was constantly learning and improving. When I came back from an operation, I would think about what we did right and what we did wrong. I would go to sleep dreaming about it, what we did right and what we did wrong. What could have happened, I dreamt about that and what my response, what actions I would have responded with. I thought about those while I was in the early stages of dreaming. And when I woke up in the morning, I was again in a dream state and thinking about that again. And then I would implement changes to make sure that we didn't make mistakes. And I would emphasize things that were successful, the things that we did that were successful. But if I had the opportunity to go back in time with the knowledge that I currently have, I would have gone medieval on the enemy earlier than I did. I would have been aggressive, and I would have been focused more on direct action than reconnaissance much earlier as a 1-0. So the next question is about, let's see. What was the psychology of a member? And that's a question that I can answer for myself, but I can't answer for others in Recon Company. The next question is, let's see. Psychology. Yeah. In that same question, which was from Jay Guapo, from your own thinking, what was your own mindset when dealing with chaotic situations and overcoming impossible odds? I guess it was part of my character that I was very calm in firefights. The way I handled contact with the enemy is, going back to that dream state and dreaming about what I did right and what I did wrong. I started to use what might be called pattern matching. So if I saw a certain enemy behavior, I kind of knew what to expect, and I kind of anticipated. On other occasions, I would get kind of a feeling in the back of my neck, an instinct that served me well, and that would happen when I was thinking about making a very risky move, whether there was, do a risk-benefit analysis on the spot, saying whether the benefit of doing what I intended to do would pay off in some manner. And on some occasions, I thought that the risk exceeded the benefit. An example would be if I walked down a road, which my Montagnards did not like at all, which was a danger area, of course. But the reason I walked down a road, and as much as a kilometer, was because in reconnaissance, we were having difficulty finding enemy truck parks and headquarters and bivouac areas and stuff like that. And if you approached a road and didn't find something when you came up upon it, then you would have to constantly circle around in the hopes that you would find something. And I thought that was nonsense. So what I did was I walked down the road and I spotted turnoffs for truck parks and high-speed trails that would lead to headquarters. And from that, I was able to figure out where the enemy was most likely to be located by looking at the terrain. Pattern matching, I'll give you an example of pattern matching, which is if you see an enemy in a rear area, and he's carrying his weapon at high port, that means that enemy knows you are very close to him, and he's looking, he's trying to find you. And you'll be fortunate if he doesn't spot you. But an enemy in his rear area does not carry his weapon at port arms. He has it at sling arms or across his chest. His fingers are not on the trigger. His hand is not on the foregrip. He's not poised to engage. So when you see that, you know you've been almost discovered or possibly discovered, because that's an anomaly. That's something you do not see in a rear area. So all these things help me in dealing with those chaotic situations and reducing them to something tolerable. Okay. So there is a question about, let's see.
Calling danger close is a good one.
Yeah, danger close. Okay. Looking for who asked that question. Can't find it right offhand. So the question was basically, how do you deal with danger close situations? Danger close is when you bring fire support, whether it's close air support or artillery support, to within 400 meters of your location. That's considered danger close to the Army. For me, danger close wasn't a problem. I didn't give it a second thought. Every engagement that we had was at very close range, within 20, 30 meters. And if we couldn't break contact, then I would bring in TAC air right on the enemy. That would typically be guns to strafe them, and I would mark their position, and I would accept responsibility with the forward air controller and with the aviators who are bringing the heat. Tell them I would accept responsibility for danger close. If the team was carrying wounded or got pinned down, we were always in a danger close situation. And we would flee. Particularly we were carrying casualties, we would try and find a trail or get on top of a ridge line so that we could move as fast as we could, because the enemy was always less encumbered than we were. We were carrying typically a 60-pound load. And then if you're carrying a wounded guy, that is a real burden. So you wanted to find a way to accelerate your movement through the jungle, and that would frequently be on top of a ridge line. And while we're moving, then we would bring in air support behind us, kill pursuit. And that was always very close. Okay, so there it is. Okay, I'm reorienting here. Okay. The question is, was there any substantial language barrier between the Americans and the Montagnards? If so, how did you overcome the barrier? Did they become fluent in English before joining the teams? Was it all hand signals? Was there an interpreter? So yes, there was an interpreter, and frankly, the interpreter was marginal. The interpreter would speak pidgin English, best at first grade elementary school level. But he was all that we had in order to explain stuff to the Montyards. There were some interpreters on other teams who had very good skills in English, but not mine. So we used the interpreter extensively during teaching the guys battle drills and things like that. And then his purpose when we were in the field was to be ready to interpret any enemy that we heard in the woods to determine what he was saying. And if we ever had an opportunity to capture a POW, he was there to speak to the POW and tell him to surrender or behave himself. So that the interpreter was typically the most important guy from the indigenous side of the team. The next most important guy would be, of course, the point man, and the third most important guy would be the tail gunner. Let's see. During an operation, 99% of the communications with Montagnards was with hand and arm signals. During breaks, during movement, I would, of course, talk to my other Americans on the team to give them our position on the map, the coordinates where we were. Okay. So the next question is about long distances the teams were inserted from friendlies. And what was the farthest insertion from a fire base or friendly? Well, we had a boundary established by the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Laos, and with the State Department, that we would penetrate no further than 25 miles from the South Vietnamese border into Laos and Cambodia. The reason why they established that boundary was because they were afraid that the Chinese would intervene if we penetrated further, which was really stupid, but that's the way it was. Notwithstanding that, we occasionally went outside those boundaries, so we basically had to conceal from the State Department and the ambassador to Laos that we were penetrating that far. I'll talk more about that in a little bit later on. Well, examples would be Tailwind. If you're familiar, that's an exploitation force that was inserted. And they were inserted 50 kilometers from the border. And I was targeted on a mission that was halfway to the Mekong River, and it was 91 kilometers. It was actually closer to Thailand than it was to the South Vietnamese border. Okay. There's a question about an E&E plan, escape and evasion plan. and how we dealt with that. So you always planned escape and evasion. Special forces are always supposed to do that on how to withdraw from an engagement. And that included withdraw from pursuit. So basically, if we got into an engagement and we couldn't continue the mission, if we were compromised, we would follow streams to an opening in the canopy and display a signal panel. If we thought it could be detected, we would follow that stream until we came to an area that could be used was large enough for an extraction. If we were pursued resolutely by an enemy away from stream valleys, we would have to find a large open area in order to display an emergency letter. In the sunlight, the signal mirror worked remarkably well. If you were under canopy and you could hear the aircraft and the engine propellers, and if you had a smoke munition, that is to say a white phosphorus, that was an option. So that you could mark where you were and either bring in TAC air to get an enemy off your tail, or so that your forward air controller could direct you to a landing zone. If all these options were foreclosed, then we would make for the Mekong River and Thailand, which would be essentially from where we were operating, it could be 75 kilometers away. That would be a long march. And maybe along that way, the aviation assets we had at our disposal would find us, hopefully before we had to travel that far. At any rate, some team leaders wore expensive jewelry just for this eventuality. So they would wear heavy gold bracelets and heavy gold necklaces, and with pendants on them. And their view was that they could break off a section from the bracelet or from the pendant or the chain that they were wearing, and barter that to get assistance from locals. Okay. I have a question from Brent Erickson. Why was I using a drum magazine? I used the drum magazine because I carried the drum magazine on the weapon to prevent ammunition links from entangling with vines and vegetation. I typically carried, I also carried two other drum magazines. Each magazine contained 100 rounds of a 7.62 intermediate cartridge, the AK round. And then I had two canteen pouches. Each of those had 100 rounds of linked ammunition. So I carried a load of 500 rounds of ammunition. Okay. Somebody asked me about a bolo knife. I never used a bolo knife in the field. If you're familiar with what a bolo knife is, it's basically a machete, a very heavy blade. Instead, I carried a meat cleaver. And I thought the meat cleaver would be a good idea because it served the same purpose as a bolo knife, but it had a flat area on the blade that you could use as a digging implement. I do have a bolo knife, How did you conduct night operations without night vision goggles? And basically, we did not move at night unless we were forced to. Uh, Under triple canopy, you were in absolute darkness. We did not have night vision goggles. They were just coming into the field. I think we had one set for the entire FOB, and we had one night vision scope for a 50 caliber machine gun, and that was all that we had in night vision equipment. And of course, we had priority on all this good stuff over line units, conventional units, so they just weren't available. So we would hide. We'd reach the objective during the daylight, and then we would take up a hide position. And on one occasion, I found a hidden enemy road, and I decided I would try a night operation there, walking down the road, hoping that the enemy would not anticipate this kind of behavior from an American recon team. But that mission was compromised before we could make the attempt. John Plaster, to my knowledge, had the only successful night operation, and that was a night ambush to try and capture somebody on a truck, and that came off pretty well. But again, they moved up to the road during daylight hours, and then moved forward to the verge of the road just at dark. You should know that you really can't use night vision goggles under triple canopy and absolute blackness. The night vision goggles use available light, and they magnify the light to aid in viewing in darkness. But in absolute darkness, you could not see at all. Now, early on, night vision goggles, in probably the second generation, had a small diode, an infrared diode, which would illuminate your immediate area so that you could look at a map in the dark. But otherwise, night vision goggles, it did not work at all. Next question is by Ben, and he says, how convinced were you to survive the deployment and come back home? Did you think about returning at the beginning of the mission? And what was your motivation? So, John Plaster and I probably had the same perspective. We really didn't expect to come back from SOG operations. We expected to get killed. And we were kind of at peace with that. It was kind of an expected outcome. And I don't know how many others, I never really spoke to anybody else about this, but John Plaster was open in discussing this with me, and that's the way he felt. Okay. There's a question, let's see, about what was the combat load, I would say the typical combat load was 70 pounds. Sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on what kind of an operation you're on. So My team were burdened with additional ammunition because of the nature of our operations. Direct action. We had mortars. We carried a mortar. So I had a couple guys carrying a supply of mortar rounds, both white phosphorus and high explosive. And each of my team members would carry an additional mortar round in their rucksack. So those guys would carry, substantial cargo. Okay, moving on. So here's a question about the best technique for moving silently. That's from Hank Martin. The recon pace was 1,000 kilometers, a kilometer a day, 1 kilometer per day. That's 1,000 meters per day. And that was very slow pace. So what you did is you would be moving along and you would look at the ground. You would glance at the ground, I would say, to figure out a place to set your foot. And you did that for both feet so that you didn't step on something that would make a noise. And everybody in the team followed that practice. And of course, you're often on a slope, so you had to make sure that your footing was good so that you didn't slip and fall. And that was the way we moved. Watch for foot placement and maintain balance. While we were moving, every hour we would take about a 10-minute break, and then in somewhere around 11:30 in the morning, we would stop to make a communications break. We went into a perimeter. During the communications break, we would eat a meal, and then we would pick up and move after a successful communication. I was on half rations. The rest of my team were on full rations. I used half rations because the less you eat, the lighter you sleep. So that was my decision. And then prior to dusk, we would again stop, take a communications break, eat another meal, and then move again to a night defensive perimeter. Did I answer that question? And so there's a question here. Did you carry a good luck charm? Were you superstitious? Well, I wore a Buddha because I thought Buddha was in charge in Asia. So I wore a Buddha just in case. There's a question here about readjustment like. What was readjustment like when you returned back to the United States? This is from Philosophic Warrior. And how did your outlook on life and American society change? Did you even try to explain the virtually unexplainable? And that's an excellent question. Readjustment was not a problem for me. I stayed in the Army. And if I had PTSD, I dealt with it. I probably did have PTSD. As a matter of fact, I did. But I did not mingle with a civilian society. It was impossible for me to explain my experience to anybody. It was even impossible to explain it to other servicemen during my career. 27 years, 7 months of career. The only people that I could discuss my experience in SOG was with other SOG veterans. Anybody else would not be able to understand, even my contemporaries in the military. It would be doubtful that they would even believe the stories that I could tell. There's a question here by Animal Mother. Would I do it again? And if I could go back in time but retain my memories, and if I could restore my youth, yes, I would, without hesitation. There's a question here by LOL Suit. And the question is, what is the one thing you would change above all others? I mentioned this earlier. I would have gone full medieval early on. I would have gone direct action early on. Also, we were ordered not to take operational notes and take photos back to the world, back to the United States with us. I should have ignored that requirement in hindsight, because most of SOG documentation was destroyed, never to see the light of day. And the last thing is, when I left FOB2, I forgot that I received 210 awards, and I left them in the company safe when I left Vietnam, and I never was able to retrieve them. So obviously I would have brought them back with me. So that's that question. And so let's see. There's a question here about funny stories about R&R that may or may not have happened. I can't answer that because they're all risque. Let's see. Here's a question from, what did you dream about when you were in the field? And I think we all, the Americans anyway, all dreamt about cheeseburgers and sodas and a hot priority as our priority when we got back. As a hot shower, I should say, was the first priority. There's a question here from Uncle Bobity. Would you have been able at the time to cooperate with units you knew were either from the future or technology from the future, our present tense, like C-130 gunships, drones, GPS, if you were ordered to integrate those assets? He's a writer. I guess he's looking for writing material. So my answer is we did have access to C-130 gunships. I used Spooky and 2 C-130 gunships on an operation where the enemy had closed in on us on our night defensive perimeter. This again was a danger close operation. The Spooky did not want to use their miniguns in support of us unless we could mark our position. This was at night. I tried firing a pen gun and was able to penetrate the canopy with a special pen gun that had a canopy penetrator. But that was not sufficient for that gunship or for the subsequent gunships to come to our aid. They wanted a strobe light. I attempted to use a strobe light. It could not be seen from the aircraft because of the canopy. So I had a stroke of brilliance, and there was a cluster of tall bamboo close by. I climbed up one of the stalks of bamboo until the bamboo bent over, attached the strobe light to the top of the bamboo, let the bamboo come back up to its fully erect position, and then they could see the strobe light. So I was able to adjust danger close within 30, 40 meters. Drones and GPS do not work under continuous multi-tiered canopy. And that we didn't have GPS back then, and of course, had we had it, it wouldn't have worked. Drones work fine above the canopy, but they cannot. The jungle density and the density of trees and bamboo and stuff like that. Current version of drones would simply not work under canopy. It would have been great had we had drones. That would have saved a lot of lives and would have been operationally superb, but we just didn't have them. I would gladly have employed any technology or weapon system relevant to our environment that was man-portable, but our combat was up close and personal mode, and so it was very basic. So if the technology required an operator, that probably wouldn't have worked with us. It was kill or be killed gunfights that lasted less than a minute. So putting technology to work for us was often not possible. Resorted to close air support. Okay. So the next question is, this is an excellent question. There's a question about alcohol consumption. This is from Caleb. And he asks that he has a lot of photos about SOG personnel having beers and a good time, and knowing that modern militaries discourage alcohol consumption. Well, alcohol consumption was actually encouraged. There was not a stigma attached to it, although it might have better been, had that been the case. In that era, we had plenty. We had a club that sold liquor by the bottle and cases of beer. These beverages were sold using a ration card. So you used a ration card, so you didn't so you didn't purchase so much of these alcoholic beverages that you might go into business in the local economy. So most teams stocked beer in their team room refrigerator. Almost every team that I knew of had a small refrigerator. And the recon company commander would greet a returning team, or the Americans at least, with cold beers. There were some American team members who would come back from an operation and would get drunk and stay drunk for 2 weeks straight, binging. But once they received a warning order for a mission, then they would dry out. Okay. Here's a good one. Let's see. What did I miss? What do I miss now? And I miss the brotherhood and the simplicity of life back then. There was another question regarding classification of SOG operations. Was it taken seriously? Yes, it was taken seriously by nearly everyone, but there were some people who broke security. And there was always rumors that circulated. So here's another story related to that. I was in the club enjoying a soda. And Dave Baker from RT Maine, and Carl Hamilton, which is his 1-1, his assistant team leader. We were all sitting at a table, and into the club came 2 reconnaissance personnel. That's Dave Baker on the screen, and that's his 1-0 award. That's what the 1-0 award looked like. It was a chrome-plated 9mm Browning high power. So 2 reconnaissance personnel from the 4th Infantry Division came into the club, ordered beers. They sat in the table next to ours, and one of them started mocking us, saying, "Yeah, you guys, you Special Forces guys, all you do is train Montagnards. You're not like real men," kind of a thing. And he didn't know what we did for a living. He didn't know what our mission was. But the guy next to him got very nervous because he did know, because rumors had circulated. And he tried to stop the guy from overloading his ass with his mouth. He finally got the guy's attention and whispered into his ear, and the guy turned white, and they quickly finished their beers and left. That's an interesting little story. Okay, so the next question is a good one. What does it feel like to be hunted? That comes from the commentary. In our operations, the hazard was so great that it really focuses and sharpens the mind. All your survival instincts kick in, and the senses go to a higher level, much higher level. So once you're on the ground, from the instant you stepped onto the ground, as a matter of fact, while you're above the ground on the helicopter, about to be inserted, that's when the level of pressure increased substantially. And while you were on the ground, there were frequent surges of adrenaline. So if you were in a perimeter, for instance, and say you were eating your meal during the noon break, and one of the Montagnards, just one Montagnard, if he froze, everybody would notice immediately, and everybody else then would freeze, and all the senses would come into play. The sense of smell, sense of hearing in particular, and no one would relax until the guy who initially froze unfroze. And that kind of a thing happened over and over again throughout a mission. Almost every time you took a meal break at noon, one of those occasions would happen where somebody would hear something and freeze, and then everybody else would freeze. Okay. Here's an interesting question here, and I'm going to spend some time on this. This is from Paulie Walnuts Forever. Did Big Army put your hard-learned lessons to use during and after the war? Did Big Army listen to you? Was your upper chain of command a help or a hindrance in your mission? And how easy or hard was it to procure weapons, gear, and personnel that you wanted? All very good questions. So the Army did not retain lessons learned. We had a 1-0 school that was located in a long time. And the purpose of that school, or one of the purposes of the school, was to train incoming American Special Forces. And it was basically familiarization training and basic reconnaissance training. I call it basic. And where some lessons learned and tactics, techniques, and procedures were conveyed. And most of the instructors there had some reconnaissance background. Some did not. That's another story. All program of instruction and lessons learned were destroyed shortly after the war. That included, the lesson plans were conveyed to a detachment at Camp Mackall, which was the training facility for Special Forces, to the then called the Strategic Reconnaissance Committee. The purpose of that committee was to continue training replacements for SOG even after they closed down Laos and Cambodia to our insertions and our operations. So I served as an instructor there for a couple of cycles, and then was sent to Operations and Intelligence course. And by the time I finished that course, the Strategic Reconnaissance course at Camp Mackall was deactivated. And all the lesson plans that they had were destroyed. None of that was available later on to convey to the rest of the Army. Reinventing the wheel is Army game number 3. It's high up there in the kind of games that the Army does. And what that game is, reinventing the wheel. We seem to forget the lessons of the past and then have to learn them all over again. And it costs lives and it costs operational success. The United States used to have a jungle training facility in Panama. It was 36 kilometers square, 36 miles square actually. And it was capable of training up to battalion echelon. And the instructors were Special Forces. Battalions going through that went through pre-deployment training for Vietnam. Now, after they deactivated that facility, when we turned Panama back over to the Panamanians, now we have 2 small training activities, one in Hawaii, which is only 14 square miles, and another in Okinawa for the Marine Corps. The one in Hawaii is used to train incoming troops for the 25th Infantry Division, and it's their area of responsibility in the Pacific. And so they give them about 12 days to 2 weeks training, and it's very basic, elementary kinds of jungle survival and jungle navigation kinds of things. Now we're facing a threat in southwest, let me rephrase that. The Army envisioned a threat in Southwest Asia 10 years prior to Desert Storm. And they established a 1,000 kilometer square National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, which was just in time. So they had 10 years really to prepare and operate in a desert environment before they were committed to Desert Storm. So now we have a national security strategy that says that China is the pacing threat going forward. And it's been like that for probably around 10 years now, perhaps more. China is a greater threat to the United States and Western security than the Southwest Asia ever was. So where is the Jungle National Training Center? We don't have one. We don't have anything that can train anybody beyond platoon level. If we are, if we get involved in a war, they will be going as is without training for almost everybody except the 25th Infantry Division and the Ranger battalions, perhaps. I'm very concerned about this, the state of preparedness and training overall, including Special Operations Forces for fighting in the Indo-Pacific region. And for those who think that this is just another fight, just like Iraq and Afghanistan, they're in for a real shock. The chain of command at FOB2 and at SOG generally were largely very helpful and responsive. The sole exception was the intelligence staff function, which were very disappointing to me. I won't explain that right now. It would be too involved to explain it. Next question associated with that was the weapons and gear were generally plentiful. SOG, Recon was on a volunteer basis. Sometimes we had a problem filling positions. Attrition was high. Sometimes we had to accept less than qualified people. But if they volunteered for SOG and we had urgent vacancies, then they were brought in. And that often it didn't end well very frequently. So I have a question about what my perfect ambush scenario was. So I confess to having a fantasy. I always had a fantasy of a chance encounter with an NVA battalion in mass formation, assembled for PT. And I dreamt about bringing my team up into a hasty ambush formation and with TAC air on the way and blowing the shit out of them. I had that dream recurrently for at least a year and a half. How much, this is by the former question about the perfect ambush was by Maku the Dank Fish. This next question is by Slim Pickens. How much water did you actually drink per day when in the rear and went on patrol? During the monsoon season, the air was basically liquid. The rain was so prolific that you could literally not see your hand in front of your face, even while you were wearing a hat. You were breathing in liquid with every breath you took. But during the dry season, you had to seek out water sources. When it wasn't the hot season, I would typically carry 2 canteens. Some of my guys carried more canteens than that. They would carry 2 canteens on their web belt and then 2 canteens on their rucksack. You consumed water because you had dehydrated food, but every time you passed a stream, you would pause on the opposite side of the stream, give one or two of your Montagnards a canteen to go refill, and they would have guys of, who would do overwatch while they filled canteens at the stream. In the FOB, I have no idea how much I drank personally in soda and coffee. So the next question is from Jeff. He calls himself CEO of Mommy Issues. And his question is about elaboration on the consumption of methamphetamines used by teams. He picked that up from John Plaster's book. So each team leader rather, was issued what was called a 1-0 kit. It was issued from the dispensary just prior to an operation. And the kit contained some controlled substances. They had morphine syrettes, and they had a medicine bottle containing green hornets. We call them green hornets. They were dexedrine, which were a form of methamphetamine. These were intended for personnel in maintaining wakefulness, such as waiting in night ambush or in a night defensive perimeter with the enemy in close proximity. I know of only one team leader who abused the dexedrine to stay awake throughout the entire duration of his mission. And he became addicted to those. And once that became known, he was removed from Recon Company. At night, he would experience hallucinations. He would say, "The enemy, I hear the enemy. They're coming up on us." And he'd wake up his entire team over and over again. And they would not detect any enemy. After a couple of missions, somebody tipped off the commander of Recon Company, and he was removed. Okay. So there's a question about how I empowered my fellow soldiers to make their own decisions. Actually, I led by example. The needs of my troops superseded my own needs. I assigned responsibility to subordinates in preparation for operations. They learned through doing. And at least 3 of my subordinates became skilled enough to take their own teams. So they were, taken from my team and placed in the team leader position in other teams, which was fine with me. And then I just wound up training new guys. And that was by a guy called Statue Left. So there's a guy by the name of Matt Morhaki Moorbooks. And he asks, how did I maintain focus when the jungle conditions were at their worst? Normally it wasn't difficult. If I had a choice between hot targets and cold targets, it would always be hot targets. As a matter of fact, I never had to ask for hot targets. I was always given hot targets because my team was heavily armed and we had a good reputation. On the one occasion where I was given a quote cold target, it was a target that had never been run before, and there was absolutely no intelligence on it at all. It turned out to be the location of an enemy core equivalent. So that was a hot target. But if I felt that, it seemed to me, based on my experience and observation of other teams, the teams who were inserted into what was presumed to be cold targets, they got sloppy. So I preferred hot targets because I wanted that edge. I wanted my people up for the worst possible conditions. Okay. I have a question from Black Rifle Ranch. What's the most important trait of a good reconnaissance man? I would say wisdom that's acquired from applied training plus experience. Knowing the enemy, respecting the enemy, exercising good judgment, coolness under fire, and attention to detail. The leadership of the recon company would typically assess people on the reconnaissance teams to identify prospective team leaders, and they would always consider judgment, coolness under fire, and attention to detail. So that's the answer to that question. And so, okay. Of all the training and life experience you had, what did you credit the most with keeping you alive? And I mentioned this before, after a number of operations, you begin to acquire a sixth sense. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't right. Once you have that ability to do that, you pay attention and follow your instincts when making a decision. And anticipating the enemy. And in order to anticipate the enemy, you had to know the enemy and his tactics and where he was likely to be found. Okay, so here's another question here by William Money. What was the closest the Grim Reaper got to you, and how did you evade him? Good question. So I and my team on 3 occasions walked through the kill zone of an ambush 2 to 3 times that I can remember. Yeah. And we all came out unscathed. And I think this was attributable mostly to the fact that we wore enemy gear, carried enemy weapons, and wore enemy uniforms. And I didn't find out until I came out the other end of the ambush that there had been an ambush set up that had been detected by my Montagnards, but they did not want to disclose that because they were concerned that I would open fire and get them into a close encounter. So that was, I chastised them not to do that anymore. It was my decision to whether to initiate contact or not. The next question here is Katie Powers' War Journal. And her question is, what was the M16 ammo pouch on your right shoulder and why was it so high up? Okay. That pouch contained an emergency radio. And in the event that we lost primary radio, in a prairie fire emergency situation, that was our only ability to contact the Airborne Command and Control Center to summon TAC Air. So I wanted that because I was handling a machine gun, which required two hands to operate. I wanted the radio speaker as close as possible to my ear. So that's why that pouch is there. Now you also notice that there are 2 grenades, and I took some heat for that because people would say, what if that grenade exploded after being hit by an enemy AK round? And my answer would be, it was a very slim chance that would happen because it would have to be a very lucky shot to strike the grenade initiator up at the top of the grenade. And if that happened, I would also receive the benefit of that round. It would penetrate the fuse body and enter me somewhere in the region of my neck or shoulder. And besides that, if you hit a grenade anywhere on your body, and we carried a pouch full of grenades, if you hit a grenade detonator anywhere on your body, that would mean instant death anyway, because those would detonate. And the whole thing would detonate, probably the entire bag of the grenades would detonate. So I thought that the risk was trivial. And I thought that positioning of grenades was beneficial because if I got into a prone position, my grenades were on the front of my belt. So it was easier for me to reach a grenade that was mounted where you see them. Okay. Okay, so. Okay, so I have another question by Mind Ya Bins. What was the overall goal of SOG, and did the operation bear any fruit? Which is a good question. Overall, the goal of SOG has been faithfully recorded on the Presidential Unit Citation. You can find that on the internet. It's too wordy for me to discuss. But basically, SOG was the Vietnam era version of the OSS, the Second World War OSS. Encompassed many mission areas: direct action, special reconnaissance, unconventional warfare, and PSYOPs. But to my mind, the value was typically economy of force. The enemy was compelled to establish a very large rear area support capability that was equivalent to 5 NVA infantry divisions. And those personnel then were not used inside of South Vietnam. And oh, by the way, we also killed a bunch of NVA and destroyed any number of vehicles carrying troops and equipment and supplies. So that was beneficial too. So that's the kind of thing that I thought was most advantageous. Okay. Skip that one. There's a question here. Did you ever see the guys referred to as salt and pepper? Salt and pepper were supposed to be American servicemen who had deserted and joined the North Vietnamese. I never saw them. They weren't in our area of operations. They were in CCN's operational area. You can ask them. Okay. That was from Garrett Powell, by the way. Here's one from a guy by the name of Pattakis. Wasn't there another insertion method like walking in? Maybe it takes more time, but it is quieter. Helicopter looks like an ambush magnet. Those are good observations. So a walk-in was, I mentioned it before, we were having trouble completing missions because the enemy was pursuing us so hotly and because the enemy was so dense on the ground. So the colonel in charge of ground operations at SOG headquarters was looking for a way to avoid the signature associated with helicopter insertions. And he wanted any ideas at all. And of course, walk-ins were considered, kind of a standard infiltration method. So this was tried with one team, and it was very infeasible because moving at 1 kilometer per day, you didn't penetrate very far, especially into the area where the base areas were, which is where our area of interest happened to lie, where SOG's area interest happened to lie. So they had to be resupplied by the air, which helicopter again. So again, parts of the border had wall-to-wall enemy. So border area that was less populated, which would be in a possible insertion area, was far away and from the area of interest, which meant an indirect route, which meant many more kilometers that would have to be traveled. And basically the idea was they would have to be resupplied at least twice before they reached near the base area. Another more feasible insertion method was stay behind, where a team would insert with an exploitation force and then stay behind after the exploitation force was exfiltrated. That was how Douglas Miller won his Medal of Honor. He was intended as a stay behind, and he separated from the exploitation force and moved into Cambodia and had an interesting time, to say the least, in so doing. And that had a certain promise to it, but meant, the exploitation force took several flights of helicopters to insert. So the enemy would start to mass almost immediately once they saw, a group of helicopters coming in, and it would have to be a fairly large landing zone. So they would mass very quickly, and in massing, they weren't moving away from the exploitation force; they were coming towards the exploitation force. At the same time, the recon team, who was going to do stay behind, was moving away from the exploitation force, basically running head on into an enemy infantry unit. So that had promise, but frequently it didn't work out for those reasons I just stated. And then the officer in charge of ground operations tried static line and halo insertion. And static line insertion was only feasible when there was a large drop zone. Large LZs and DZs were infrequent, and they often had a lot of NVA nearby. So that was clearly under observation. And one team that inserted into an area called the golf course were dropped into trees rather than on the drop zone. And they were very fortunate to get out there alive because they were, and this is a night insertion, because they were enemy right on the periphery of this drop zone. So you never knew where you would land, whether you would land in the lap of the enemy or if you were landing in an isolated area. Parachuting into mountains covered in rainforest, I thought would be a disaster, because you had a disparity between Americans and Montagnards in terms of weight. So the Americans would descend at a slower rate, a faster rate than the Montagnards. And the Montagnards would then drift off from the drop zone. There was also in the mountains a lot of cross currents of air. So the team would get scattered all over every place. And that was basically a mission compromise, because you couldn't call in air support if you had people that were unmarked in locations unknown to the aircraft. So I thought that was infeasible, and they occasionally worked, but in a very, very modest return on the investment. Okay. There's a question about whether my RPD jammed a lot. It did not. It was a very dependable weapon. As a matter of fact, the original design of the RPD was by Browning. And it was very simple mechanism to operate, and was very dependable. I only had one malfunction, and that was a misaligned round on a belt. And all I had to do was lift the receiver cover, reposition the next round, and resume shooting. So, and that was like very quickly done. There's another question here. I think it was by Safing Sector. How did you crawl at night through pitch black jungle full of poisonous snakes, insects, and dangerous predators without becoming a casualty? I say that there are plenty of snakes around. We encountered a lot of snakes. Nobody ever got bit because we understood the hazard and we mitigated the risk. Just went around them. The crawling around at night was not an option. That would be an extreme circumstance if we were surrounded and we had to do a breakout. I don't know of anybody who did that. As a matter of fact, I don't know of anybody who had ever been bitten by a venomous snake. There were some highly venomous insects, but I don't know anybody who had a bad experience there, except for one team, and they were attacked by a mating swarm of hornets, and they had to run for it, and that was in broad daylight. Next question by Mark Mills. What was your favorite belt fed to hump around? I see a lot of cut down RPDs, which had to be lighter than a PIG. A PIG is an M60 machine gun. And he mentions, why didn't we get the Stoner? Well, the Stoner was available to the SEALs who were in SOG, operated under a separate program along the shoreline of North Vietnam. We didn't have them. We didn't ask for them, to my knowledge. And we used the Car 15. I thought about using the M60, but there had been rumors floating around about malfunctioning of M60s. And malfunction is something that we could not tolerate because of how close we were when we got into contact with the enemy. But it would have weighed quite a bit more for me to carry. So my RPD was modified. I had cut off a portion of the barrel, cut off the sight, cut off the bipod. Subsequently, that weapon, without the ammunition in it, 16 pounds, whereas the M60 weighed 23 pounds. The round used by the RPD was heavy enough to cut through brush, and it was satisfactory to me. On some missions, though, I would have preferred the M60 because I would be able to get ammunition resupply. The chief problem with the RPD was the belts were hard to come by. These were reloadable belts that came in 25 round segments. So as you were firing, a 25 round segment of belt would fall off onto the ground. And that would recur as you continue firing. And they were hard to come by, so I found myself grabbing them and stuffing them into the bellows pocket on my uniform, which is inconvenient. So if we were in an area where we would have to be resupplied, in an area where contact was inevitable and the likelihood of being surrounded was high, I would have preferred an M60 because the ammunition was plentiful. Okay. I was the first guy, I believe, in SOG to use an RPD, by the way. And you may see other RPDs in photos of SOG from CCN. One of my team members acquired an RPD, so we had 2 RPDs on the team. And he loved it, of course. let's see. I had a question about doing repairs on a mission, and what was the dumbest equipment item that we had. I'll give you, we never had to do repairs in the field. So that's Nixon. We can show that again. Will you show that picture again of Nixon? So that was my assistant team leader for the latter part of my tour. Okay, so back to this question. The dumbest equipment was we were frequently given experimental, non-standard equipment and weapons and munitions. And among them was referred to as a one-shot disposable white phosphorus projector. It was about 8 inches to 10 inches long. It was an aluminum tube. It had a fold-out handle and trigger that came down with it when you extracted the handle, and it was designed to fire a cartridge of white phosphorus. And this was thought that it might be handy to break contact and to mark enemy for air attack, but it was very hazardous to use. So Joe Walker, who was the RT California team leader, the 1-0, took one on a mission he had inside his rucksack. Didn't use it during the operation. When he came out of the operation and was in training for his next operation, or actually, yeah, when he was in training for the next operation, the idea was to consume your old ammunition because it had been immersed in water and was dirty. So we typically used it for training ammunition. So he pulled this thing out, and it had a dent in it. Not a very big dent, but a dent. And he fired that, and it misfired. And it did not eject or propel forward the white phosphorus container. So he just threw it off to the side, and it detonated then because it cooked off inside the tube. So that was the end of using those, although the idea was sound. The package was not. The next dumbest equipment was the KY-38, which was an encryption device that was heavier than the radio that we carried, the FM radio that we carried. Very heavy, and it carried a separate encryption key. And if you carried it in the field, in order to use it, you had to take it out of its container. You had to hook up a cable from the encryption device, the KY-38, to your radio before you could transmit. And frequently during movement, the KY-38 would fall out of key. So then you had to reinstall the key. That's what that key was. And the key itself was heavy to carry. Very heavy single man burden. And it was unreliable and useless in the field. The threat was radio direction finding, RDF, and perhaps jamming. I never encountered that personally, others did. But the only thing that a KY-38 prevented was message intercept. That wasn't an issue for us. And we were required to carry this thing by our FOB commander, who really didn't understand the issue very well and didn't understand what we were facing in carrying the non-functional burdens around with us. So there were some teams that decided that they would accidentally lose them in the field and claim a battle loss. And after a couple episodes of that, the commander understood what was going on, and he rescinded that order. The third most dumb equipment item was a rocket pistol, and it fired about an 11 millimeter rocket. It had no recoil, and it didn't have a report per se. It made a whooshing sound when it fired. If you want to know what it looked like, there's a James Bond movie that had a lot of those used in it. Very undependable weapon. And it turns out that the ammunition had inferior penetration characteristics. So there are a bunch of other questions. Those are the questions that I picked out. How are we doing on time, bud?
We're now hitting the 2-hour mark.
Okay. So, I think that was the expected duration of this podcast.
Yes, sir. And I was going to say, the whole time you've been speaking, we've got some great questions in, and I've been taking photos of them. If you'd like to because there's some really good ones. If you'd like me to send those to you this afternoon, and next week we plan a part 2 to get into some of these, we could do that.
Okay. And now before we close, you might want to bring up those photos that I sent you. And I'll just talk to those.
Let's see. We've got here's some of the.
Okay. So that is actually a tree in a rainforest in South America. You should understand that rainforests were different from continent to continent, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the size. We would see these forests full of these in groves. Huge expanses occupied by these trees. And we occasionally would come up upon a stalk of bamboo that was so large that it took 3 men to link hands in order to encompass its diameter. Or correction, circumference. So this is the kind of tree that you will see in all the rainforests. It's deciduous. The foliage remains on it throughout the year, but the number of trees within. So the kind of forest that we had, you might consider primordial rainforest, and you find it throughout the Indo-Pacific region. And as a matter of fact, the tallest tree in the world, I believe, was in Borneo. Looks something like this, although a bit larger. Next slide. Next image. Okay, so what you see here is jungle, and the portion that you see is not rainforest. but it's dense jungle. Now, the difference between rainforest in South America and rainforest where I operated is you would have those tall trees and also with the underbrush like you see here. And you can see how dense that vegetation is, and you can imagine how difficult it is to move through it without making any sound. That's why we moved at 1 kilometer per day. Next image. Okay, so this is actually cut off. This is a Google Maps look at what was our area of operations. So you see, if you look carefully, you see an area to the lower right encompassed by a red rectangle. Lower right.
Let's see.
Right there. Okay. So that was base area 609. And it fed the main supply route down into Cambodia. A little bit to the right of that, right there, no, too far, where you see that highway sign, yeah, that's around the area of the tribe, that's the tri-border area. And actually a little to the left of that. So that was an extremely hot area. A little lower within the compass of that red rectangle. Yeah, it's right there, about there, was a full division of NVA. And you see what looks to be a road that cuts diagonally across that area. Yeah. No. It's much lighter. Right there. Okay. That was the MSR heading into Cambodia towards that division. And then once it got into Cambodia, it followed another highway, which was given another name, but it was a continuance of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was an extremely hot area. I think 3 of the Medal of Honor recipients from FOB2 earned their Medal of Honor in this area. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then to the left, there's another area encompassed by a red boundary. That is near the town of Atapu, or the city of Atapu. And that was another base area, which I can't quite recollect right now, which one that was. But around the time when I hit around 18 months at FOB2, the United States Army and the South Vietnamese invaded Cambodia. And it was partially successful. They were not able to engage main units of the North Vietnamese Army along the Cambodian border, but they did destroy every supply depot that they found. of all the commodities, the ammunition, and so forth. They destroyed all of that. Therefore, the units that were along the Cambodian border could not operate. They couldn't operate without food. They couldn't operate without ammunition. They became desperate. So the North Vietnamese expanded the area that to the west that they dominated as part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that encompassed another all-weather highway that you see there, right there, heading north, called Highway 11. And so that was all NVA area. And that's the area where I had to go outside the 25-mile boundary of SOG's area of operations. There's a pin station up there where it says Target Bridge. North. Yeah. That was the area where the target. So to the west, if you shrink the map, that light green, withdraw, pull back. So on the far left side of the image, where there, that lighter color, that's the Mekong. That's the Mekong River. And on the left of that, to the left of that, is Thailand. Now, going back to near the upper right-hand corner of that map, right there, where that red boundary is, that is base area 614. And that was where the Corps headquarters was located, that commanded all the units that were in the central highlands of South Vietnam. And I was the first guy to ever enter that area, which is bizarre, given that we knew that this was an enemy base area, but we didn't try to exploit it for intelligence purposes. And interestingly, what you cannot see it on this illustration, on this map, but there was a highway that went through this area and directly into South Vietnam. That's the river, but you get my point. It was a west to east highway. It's not visible on this map. So there was a base area with all that entailed. And I should point out that along the Ho Chi Minh Trail were regimental sized units every 25 miles. Their purpose was support of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and security of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And they had anti-aircraft systems and infantry units. This is apart from the counter-reconnaissance units that were deliberately established from the elite forces of the North Vietnamese Army. Next illustration, bud.
Oh, okay. I lost your audio for a bit. Here's another map, and I've got some other pictures.
Okay, so that's a map of Tango 7, and I did a lot of my operations in that area. The target area was established in a 6 by 6 kilometer square grid You see the terrain relief there, and the terrain interval was 25 meters. So every line that you see there is an increment of 25 meters. So that's pretty high terrain, but that is nothing compared to what is further north. What you see at the top of the map is a network of roads. That's where the base area was, where all the supply depots were concentrated. And if you go to where that stream valley is on the inside the box, right there, you see the vestiges of a highway called Highway 96. It's old Highway 96. That Highway 96 was thought to be unused. I found out otherwise. It wasn't used. It was an alternate route into Cambodia. They established a new Route 96 further east in that area where I said where we had 3 operations of yes, there you go. So you see a little village up at the top by the, withdraw, upper right. Yes. So that village didn't exist, but what did exist within the wood lines was Highway 96 that went down into Cambodia. So not only was there old 96 was also established, and that the highway had been extended under jungle canopy, unknown to SOG headquarters and MACV. I'm talking about within the box. And on the right side of that stream, which is the Dock Lay, right there, was a network of high-speed trails that also went southeast to Cambodia. So there was no question that this was an alternate route conduit for supplies and troops. Immediately to the west, sharing the same boundary, the left boundary of what you see there, was the area called Sierra 3. So between Sierra 3 and Tango 7, I had the bulk of I would say maybe 50% of my operations. And then further west from Sierra 3 was an area called Hotel 9, which is also a very hot area, where there was a concentration of enemy roads. You can't see it on this map. Okay. So next illustration. I should say that in Tango 7, Sierra 3 area, there was a 66th NVA regiment was located there near that stream, the Dock Line that you saw. And that was Ho Chi Minh's favorite regiment. All kinds of battle honors. As a matter of fact, the movie, We Were Soldiers Then and Young. Okay, that was the 66th NVA regiment. Okay, so this is a depiction of the rainforest. You can see how dense it is. That's a triple canopy rainforest. And diagonally from right there is a stream valley that runs right through it. Okay. And next illustration. So you see how dense it is. You can see how high it is, where the clouds are scraping against the ridge top. Yeah. That's it.
Let's see here. I think I've got one more. Hang on. More photos. No, sir. Actually, that is it.
Okay. So I've got others that I can provide you in due course. But anyway, I hope this was informative and worthwhile for the people who have watched.
Absolutely, and as I said, I've documented all the questions that people left today, and I'll get those to you, and we can figure out a time next week if you'd like to come back and fill in some more blanks for everybody.
As well. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hope you have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.